Welcome from Belgrade to our second day of the seminar about places of known remembrance. Now we will open the floor for the presentations. But before this, I have to thanks to those organizations and institutions that made possible the discussion, this webinar, and also the discussion of yesterday and the visit to the Topovske šupe camp that will be held on Sunday. The donors of this project are the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, the Claims Conference, the Federation of the Jewish Communities of Serbia, the Embassy of the Federal Republic of Germany in Belgrade, and the Ministry of Culture of the Republic of Serbia. Okay, the first presentation will be held by Olga Manojlović Pintar. She will give a theoretical approach, theoretical introduction about the places of remembrance and non-remembrance. Olga, she is a senior research fellow at the Institute for Recent History of Serbia in Belgrade, participant in numerous international projects and regular contributor at the international interdisciplinary conferences and roundtable discussions. She had published numerous articles and edited 3 collective volumes: the transnational history, transnational experience of the Yugoslav history, Tito, visions and interpretations, history and memory, studies of the historical consciousness, and she published also very important books: The Last Battle, Spanish Fighters and the Yugoslav Crisis of the 80s, The Archaeology of Memory, the Monuments and the Identities in Serbia from 1918 until 1989. So Olga, please, the floor is yours.
Hello and good day. At the beginning of my presentation, I would like to thank Milovan Pisari and the Center for Public History for inviting me to take part in this webinar, in this conference. I find their idea to preserve remaining buildings of the Topovske šupe camp, the camp in which most of the Jewish men living in Serbia were isolated, and in summer and autumn of 1941, from which they were transferred to the execution camps. I found their idea as one of the most important public initiatives in the contemporary Serbia. The attempts to transform Topovske šupe into a shopping mall represents the most obvious example of the several decades long lack of awareness of the need to deal with this specific legacy of the Second World War. And preventing this plan appears to be one of the most important tests for the Serbian society today. So my today's presentation, the title of my presentation today is From Non-Places to Other Spaces, the transformation of forgotten campsites to memorial sites. And by introducing this term other spaces, I have obviously decided to invite Foucault's concept of heterotopia as a useful tool for the analysis of the complex phenomenon of the Holocaust memorialization. Heterotopia represents a place set in reality, but formally set apart from it, the other space, which manages and releases tensions present in the public field. In contrast to utopia, which stands for an imagined, ideal, homogeneous but unattainable place, and dystopia as an antonym of utopia. Foucault invented the term, which refers to a place that manages and arranges otherness, foreignness, often marginal opposition, and which includes it as a specific unit into the wider social framework. Heterotopia thus combines different time and spatial perspective, while constructing the new, more or less autonomous reality. Numbering various examples of heterotopia, different objects, institutions, and even activities, such as, for example, mirror, garden, ship, or even festivities. Foucault concluded that heterotopia has the power, as he says, to juxtapose in a single real place several spaces, several emplacements that are in themselves incompatible, although distributing numerous perspectives and even introducing this perspective of insecurity and uncertainty. Each of the examples of the other spaces creates its specific order and hierarchy, establishes sets of rules and manners, and the specific order and discipline in itself. Discussing those various cases, Foucault recognized their specific common function, purpose, or should we say task. And this task is to accumulate differences. The garden, for example, consisting of the numerous plants collected all over the world and harmoniously blended into a new and unique unit, could be considered as the clearest example and explanation of Foucault's understanding of heterotopia. So, institutions like libraries, archives, and/or museums represents heterotopias as well. They're dealing with the everlasting human attempts to, among other things, accumulate and possess knowledge. Foucault perceived those institutions as warehouses, as depots that stock objects, collect traces of different times, past, present, and even visions of future and different spaces. And although their function is to maintain and curate knowledge and memory, such institutions at the same time bury their priceless wealth, as Jacques Derrida explained in his Archive Fever. As public prosthetic extensions of memory, those institutions cannot avoid their own contradictions to save and to bury at the same time knowledge. One can only speculate whether both Foucault and Derrida were inspired by the two Alain Resnais documentaries from the early 1950s. 1953, his film The Statues Also Die, in which he dealt with the musealization of the African objects in the European museums, and the 1956 Toute la mémoire du monde, which was defined as an essay on the potential and the limits of the archived human knowledge. Alain Resnais, together with Chris Marker, questioned the position of such institutions like museums and archives, in the process of the establishment of the political power. So Foucault offered similar conclusions. Once institutionally collected and archived with the intention to be saved for the eternity, the knowledge is actually frozen and concealed. Thus, libraries, archives, museums, and consequently memorials that we will talk about them today reflect human wish not only to preserve their knowledge for future generations, but to achieve and to preserve once established order, or at least to produce the sense that the perfect order and longevity are reachable. And when we open the question of the memorials as places that once existed as camps, extermination sites, or prisons, and focus the problem of their memorializations after several decades, one has to ask seemingly simple but essential questions. Why do we need to reinvent those spaces in the present? Those spaces which for decades were left nameless, present in the public, but at the same time remained invisible for the passers-by, or which were renamed, masked, or reused, and their previous functions forgotten. Why we have to dig deep into oblivion? Why do we want to save them for the future, to reintroduce the knowledge of the past in the public field and in the individual lives? For whom? Who are consumers of this history today? Who are the people that are visiting them? Who are participants in the various museums, museum projects and activities? What social and ideological concepts we are constructing upon such activities? One has to ask himself or herself also, how could we produce the authentic knowledge and to avoid misinterpretations? The Second World War campsites had their afterlives after 1945. They were for decades used for different purposes, sometimes completely abandoned or forgotten, sometimes ruined. The intention to focus exclusively on the camp experience of those sites is constructed upon the idea of preventing the realization of the dramatic Primo Levi's warning that if something happened once, it can happen again. It can be repeated. As Levi wrote, we must be listened to. Above and beyond our personal experience, we have collectively witnessed a fundamental, unexpected event, fundamental precisely because unexpected, not foreseen by anyone. It happened, therefore it can happen again. This is the core of what we have to say. It can happen, and it can happen everywhere. So, few years ago, while she was working on the collective project, The Living Death Camp, artist Milica Tomić drew my attention to 1995 book of the late Haitian anthropologist Michel Rolph Trouillot, Silencing the Past, Power and Production of History, in which the author presented his answers to some of the questions I just raised. In his book, Trouillot analyzed the role of the Africans in the Haitian Revolution, so not something that is directly connected with our topic today. And he analyzed how the role of Africans was suppressed in historical interpretation. And he demonstrated much wider phenomenon, how power silences certain voices from history and amplifies the others. In order to strengthen his argument, he dealt with the various examples and concluded that the value of a historical product cannot be debated without taking into account both the context of its production as well as the context of its consumption. And when we think about the places of non-remembrance after several decades, we have to start precisely from this position. We have to take into account both the context of its production and the context of its consumption, and to reject, as Trouillot wrote, both the naive propositions that we are prisoners of our past and the pernicious suggestions that the history is whatever we make of it. Time here is not mere chronological continuity, he concluded. It is the range of disjointed moments, practices, and symbols that thread the historical relations between events and narrative. Presenting the difficult and painful past cannot be used as a smoke screen, as the self-exculpatory way out from the different present. Dealing with the slave legacy in America, this book pointed that the contemporary American society has problem with the slavery, which is a ghost both in the past and in the present, and the problem of historical representation, as it is written in this book, is how to represent that ghost, something that is and yet is not. The crux of the matter is the here and now, the relations between the events described and their public representation in a specific historical context. These relations debunk the myth of the past as a fixed reality and the related view of knowledge as a fixed content. So what is something that is and yet is not? What is the ghost in the contemporary Belgrade and Serbia? What is the haunting past, if we want to call it this way? And what is the dominant political and cultural framework which, instead of facing it, silences the dialogue and made meaningless all the political and ideological struggles? I would say that the search for the victimhood in the remote past was misused with the intention to open and to legitimize revenge in a somewhat recent past. In an attempt to justify retaliation, such kind of approach opened the public field for the interpretations that almost annihilated and even denied the tragedy of the victims of the Second World War. So the position of the contemporary museum and memorial institutions, which are established as the public forums, open spaces promoting dialogue, but also social and political conflict, as Chantal Mouffe defined in his thoughts on agonism. This is the crucial element in the process of the revisionist interpretation deconstruction. Reintroducing past in the present is supposed to be healing, no matter how difficult. It is supposed to help us sharpen the historical mosaic. It mustn't be misleading. It cannot be used to give comfort and produce the sense of the immutable security of the past. So, when conceptualizing such memorial sites, the main intention has to be to question the attempts to create the assumption of the fixed past. Because, as Trio concluded, the focus on the past often diverts us from the present injustices for which previous generations had only set the foundation. And this is the position from which the questions I raised at the beginning of my presentation require precise answers. Searching for the historical truth and for the precise facts and data represents the core of the historical reconstruction. However, it is not the only goal of the historical research. It recognizes the facts and their interpretation, and thus creates the constitutional narratives and influences the systems of values of each respective society. The meaning of history is also in its purpose. As long as there are survivors of a certain event, as physical embodiments of history, as carriers or agents of memory, we can speak of the past as an implying or self-assuming part of the present. But when survivors are silenced, or for various reasons unable to testify, or when they step down from the historical stage, physical remains of the past, whether in ruins or in their entirety, are becoming part of the new and different political and social reality. Losing survivors' perspectives could lead to a confusing, even false image of the past that is incorrectly, even untruthfully reinterpreted and analyzed in the present. Deceiving interpretation of the past is too often produced with the intention to hide the complex problems of the present or to legitimize the awkward political realities. The interpretation of discrimination and oppression in the past could be used with the intention to hide the oppression or discrimination that continued and which is still alive in the present. The role of the victim could be used as a shroud or the winding sheet in which the present is wrapped. So when we are speaking of Belgrade and its devastating and forgotten campsites, of Topovske šupe or Staro Sajmište, we are facing the fact that their reconstruction threatens to become an empty form if we continue to ignore the context in which the image of the Second World War was changed beyond recognition over the last 3 decades. Those same revisionist interpretation will continue to produce deceiving and false conclusions if we continue to restore the image of the remote past without understanding the more recent and contemporary cases of discrimination and exclusion in this region. Remembering the Second World War victims appears to be the useful tool in the process of contemporary political power legitimation. So the constant use of the derogatory terms in the statements of the state officials, which we are facing during the last several years, and we can even talk about decades, and the institutional blindness regarding discrimination of different national, religious, ethnic groups are really revealing the emptiness of those solemnly declared promises and consequently the falsity of the official history politics. Of course, in the context of our topic, we could widen the perspective and accept the Serbian case. We could include also some other examples. In 2020, it is impossible to deal with the legacy of the Second World War in France and to talk about the French resistance without having in mind French colonial legacy and the Algerian war brutality. It is not possible to talk about the Holocaust in Croatia without mentioning the genocide over Serbs in the independent state of Croatia in the Second World War, and ignoring the tragic episodes of the 1991-1995 war. It is not possible to talk about the camps in Mussolini's Italy without understanding the contemporary migrant crisis in this country, nor to discuss the Czech legacy of the Second World War without thinking about the contemporary national exclusivism in that country. Debating past is something that always implies construction of the reality, which has to face and to accept the responsibility for the ways in which the past is remembered. From the diachronic perspective, the Second World War and its horrors cannot be considered as an isolated section of our history, no matter how unique it was and how uncomparable the experience of the Holocaust is. Today, here in Belgrade, the Holocaust, Samudaripen, and the genocide narratives must be reconstructed. But this reconstruction cannot ignore or must not be done without having in mind the wider context of the Second World War in Yugoslavia, in all Yugoslav territories. Furthermore, it cannot ignore the heavy burden of the wars of Yugoslav dissolution in 1990s. In Serbia, those recent denials of the responsibility for the crimes committed during the wars in Croatia and Bosnia in the 1990s, the refusal to define Srebrenica as genocide and to confront its deniers, while simultaneously celebrating and glorifying war criminals as heroes, are often hidden beneath the historical narratives of the Second World War and of the victims of the Serbian people during that war. And precisely this peculiarity leads us to the conclusions that when opening the questions regarding the contemporary producers and consumers of history knowledge, one has to search for the roots and the continuity of the exclusion and marginalization of the other, who was defined as such on the basis of its national, ethnic, religious, gender, sexual, or political identity. To conclude, I should say that truth over raison d'etat, truth which will not frozen our image of the past and which will question disputable political actions in the present, represents the necessary precondition for establishing the critical museum institutions and memorial sites in every society. Those institutions are not only facing us with the past and with our uncomfortable present, but have a potential to confront false interpretations. And precisely they represent the milestones on our path to a more just society. So that's why debating the Topovske šupe former camp and the ways how this space should be memorialized and the Holocaust and the Second World War should be memorialized in the Serbian society is such an important question here today. So thank you very
much. Thank you, Olga, for your very interesting presentation. I think that we needed such an introduction for the study cases that we will talk about in the following presentations. Next speakers will talk about the Gospić Jadovno Pag camp. This camp, we know that the camp was active in the independent state of Croatia from May until August 41, and was actually probably one of the first death camps in Europe. About more than 10,000 of Serbs and at least 2,000 Jews were from the independent state of Croatia were killed there. This presentation will be held by Aneta Vladimirov from Zagreb. Since 2011, she has been employed in the national coordination of the councils of the Serb national minority in the Serbian National Council as the head of its Department of Culture. Among other things, she is dedicated to the culture of remembrance, art production and analysis, monitoring of hate speech and revisionism, Holocaust and genocide denial in Croatia, and the advocacy of educational models for minorities in the Republic of Croatia. Please, Aneta, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me well, because sound over here was a little bit jammed. I will now share my screen. Thank you to the Center for the Remembering Holocaust in Serbia. From my part, as you told, I work in Serbian National Council dealing with the heavy burden of the past of the Second World War, but also the last, hopefully the last one. So here is my shared screen. My presentation, modest one, of course, the forerunner to Jasenovac, the Gospić Jadovno Pag camp system is a little bit of ironical title, in which is obvious how little do we know about the camp system that was functioning before Jasenovac. So I will try to give briefly, of course, history of this camp, also the attempts of the memorialization in Yugoslavia, what were attempts, what were mistakes probably, and then, of course, very, very important part of today social context, social political context is the war that was happening in the 90s, and during this war, the destroying of the anti-fascist heritage that were carried out together by Croats and Serbs and many other people in the Second World War within the partisan resistance towards Ustaša regime and Nazi fascism. At the end, of course, I will try to explain today context and our attempts. When I say our, I would mean, of course, on the Serb National Council, but as well coordination of the Jewish municipalities in Republic of Croatia, and of course some, as you can say, agents of remembering the NGOs that are, as you do, trying to deal with the past in Croatia. So for the start, I have the obligation, through a little bit of historical curiosity, just to mention the whole bunch of crimes committed by Ustasha before even Gospić camp group, better known as Jadovno, was founded, and that was formally the 2nd of June 1941. So according to the Observatore Romano, I'm sorry for my pronunciation, Milovan, Pope Pius XII received Pavelić on 18th of May 1941, and that happened 1 month after the massacre of the 25 persons near Staro Petrovo Selo, 20 days after the killings of the almost 200 people in Budovac near Bjelovar, 13 days after the murder and mutilation of Bishop of Banja Luka and Archpriest Dušan Subotić, 10 days after the Croatian military formation killed more than 500 Serbs without the use of firearms in Hrvatski Blaga i Kordun, better known as slaughter of Veljun. Just 7 days after the slaughter of around 300 Serbs from Glina in the village of Prekopa, and 4 days after shooting 45 Serbs near Sanski Most, which is today's territory of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and after, of course, numerous individual crimes or crimes committed in smaller groups against Serbs and Jews and, of course, political enemies of the Ustasha regime. So you can see that they were very organized, and the killings, mass killings, before founding of the concentration camp in Danica, and after that Gospićka group of camps was very active. So Gospić group of concentration camps, which include Gospić, Jadovno, and Pag, as I already told you, is better known historiography as Jadovno, and it's the first and probably the best example of the fact that independent state of Croatia, with all of its agency from Ustasha organization, political and military, or police organs to the state administration, were engaged in organized genocide and Holocaust. This is also one maybe historical curiosity. You can see the money of 1,000 kuna in independent state of Croatia, and on this bill you can see in large part of banknote, which is clear, where is clear Velebit, Pag, the Bay of Pag, and that's the exact location, one of the locations of Gospić, Jadovno, Pag camps, where we had two camps divided in for men's, divided in Serbian and Jewish one. So before any kind of resistance within the entire territory, including Camp Danica, Jews, Serbs, and political enemies were deported to the location in Gospić, Gericht, which is the first place of many places of this group of camps. And after that, to different locations. You can see some of the locations on these two maps. On the right side, I'm sorry if it's smaller one, but on the right side, you can see the map of the whole camp, and on the left side, the map of the part of the camp that was connected with the island Pag, and what you have seen on that image of the Slana Bay on the 1,000 banknote. So the groups of victims were very, very different from whole of the territory of the independent state of Croatia. And within the maybe lack of time now, I just wanted to show you a few cases of the victims. Here is a plaque, a memorial plaque that you can see if you visit the Jewish municipality in Zagreb, in Palmotićeva street, and you can see the plaque with the names of 165 Jewish young men mostly members of the Maccabi club, who were deported to the Danica at the end of the May of the 1941. In early July, the group was transferred to the Gospić-Jadovno Pag camp system, from where 8 were deported to Jasenovac, which means the other one were killed. A memory about these young men have saved the only survivor, Božo Švarc, who actually gone through the whole scale of concentration camps in Croatia, because he was even in Jasenovac, from where he managed to escape. The other example of victims is our brothers of the world-famous artist Vojin Bakić, who was lucky enough to survive Second World War, but unlike 4 of his brothers, Milan, Slobodan, Nikola, and Alexander, who were arrested and deported, of course, again, first to the Danica camp, which is a kind of transition camp, and then to the Jadovno site, where all trace of them is lost. This plaque that you can see on the right is the plaque that was on their house in the city of Bjelovar, and unfortunately it was destroyed in the 90s during the war. This year, together with the anti-fascists of Bjelovar, we put a new one, the replica, of course, and we had a commemoration for the Bakić brothers. The prisoners, as I already told you, were also sent via Velebit and Karlobag to the island of Pag, where the men were taken to Slana Bay and women to Mitajna village. All of them survived the journey through the torture, rape, and hunger, but eventually they were all killed. The victims remained unburied, and the truth about them was almost forgotten. Gospić-Jadovno Pag system was closed by Italian reoccupation of Zone B in August 1941, and the last survivors of the Slana camp, one of the locations of the Gospić group of camps, they were the first inmates of the Jasenovac concentration camp. So these were very briefly historical data about what was going on before Jasenovac was erected. And of course, as many other topics, and Olga was speaking about it, when it comes to Second World War, our focus on the number of victims is always damaging the subject that we are dealing with, and making a controversy of historical facts. So the most active in studying, investigating, researching Jadovno tragedy was, of course, Đuro Zatezalo, and from his study we are having the most of the facts, but there are a lot of the researchers that gave some estimation of the numbers of victims, and I will just mention few of them. Slavko Goldstein, of course, the first one, also a son of a victim from Jadovno, in his book 1941, The Year That Returns, which I'm sure you have heard of, estimates that about 24,000 people were killed in that system of camps. We have some other estimation, such as Dragan Cvetković, from the researcher from the Museum of Genocide from Belgrade, states a number of about 1,500,000 people based on a corrected list of victims of the Second World War. As I already mentioned, the most extensive and detailed work on the system of Gospić-Jadovno camp was written by Đuro Zatezalo, and at the end of his, before 90s, he worked hard to create a list of victims by name, but the disintegration of the Yugoslavia made it impossible to complete it. So by the 1990, he had managed to obtain the data for 10,000 people, around 10,000 people. The beginning of the war in Yugoslavia, of course, stopped all further research and drastically changed the structure of the population into research, but also the narrative that was now part of a new states, independent republics, ex-republics of Yugoslavia. So when we speak about Gospić Jadovno Pag camp, the most important person when it comes to the first public condemnation of the atrocities in Slana, and the Ustaša order in general on Pag, was actually the Hawthorne wreath, which was made by Ante Zemljar. You can see him to the right with his comrades Vinko, Fabijanić, and Zuanić of 1943. They immediately after the disbandment of the Ustaša camp Slana and its department in Metajna, on a large white cross in the city cemetery in Pag, put this thorny Hawthorne wreath with black ribbons and the inscriptions "Victims of Slana." Everyone in Pag knew that the massacre had taken place in Slana on the night before. And the next day, the executioners even came to Pag without hiding bloody marks on their clothes and their knives. So in such an atmosphere, the appearance of this protest with the Hawthorne wreath resounded in Pag louder than the bomb shoot or something like that. So basically, Ante Zemljar with his friends risked their lives just to commemorate the victims of Slana. And this is the first gesture and an inspiration actually for us in trying to explain what have happened over there and what is the importance of this kind of symbolic and very risky resistance, of course. So, as I already told at the beginning, we have to have a brief introduction about what were attempts in memorializing the lives of those exterminated within the Gospić group of camps during the Yugoslavia period. There were initiatives after the war, 1947. The son of a victim, Kosta Popović, visited the Jadovno camp and where his father was killed. And he was having a kind of appeal to the Association of Serbs in Croatia with a desire to mark the place of suffering and bury the victims with dignity. Unfortunately, he did not get an answer, and so he organized the first commemoration 4 years later, on 25th of July, 1951, and after that, 1958, just a wooden cross was erected on the Jadovno camp place. Later on, some relatives were trying and having initiatives for mass exhumation of the pits of those who were killed and their proper burial. In addition to the above joint request, others were sent, as well as a number of individual requests. So they didn't get their answer until 1952, when they were told that the commission, after visiting the mentioned site, had established that the transfer of the corpses would be impossible. So we are dealing with the postponed trauma, with remembering the Jadovno, and it was not until July 27, 1962, that a monument to the victims of Jadovno was erected near the Orthodox cemetery in Gospić, and its so-called gallows. Eventually, there was a commission established 1985 with the purpose to create a memorial area on Jadovno, and the monument that you can see was erected 1988, but the entire memorial was never completed. So these were, of course, again, very briefly, the history of trying to remember Jadovno as a non-possible place for human, suffering of many people. So what actually have happened in the 90s? You can see here just a modest example. Actually, it's a memorial plaque to the victims of Ustaša crimes in Lika, destroyed at the cemetery in Jasikovac. And just near this cemetery were this monument gallows that I was mentioning that were destroyed and alienated in the war. Of course, many of similar memorial plaques were damaged or broken that were dedicated to the very specific groups of victims, like Orthodox priests or the victims from the Grubišno Polje. And I can mention that the first deportation that was happening in the independent state of Croatia was happening in Grubišno Polje. They were first one that were deported to the camp Danica, and after it to the Gospić Jadovno. So we have a lot of other memorial plaques that were put somewhere on the locations near Central monument that was also destroyed. You have seen it on the last screen, and of course there was a very modest plaque on the Slana Bay, and that was destroyed not just 1991, but we have rebuilt it twice more, 2010 and 2013, but with the same fate. In a very short time, these plaques were destroyed by unknown person or a group of people. So you can now imagine that the burden, not just of the collective experience of trauma in the Second World War, but this unsuccessful attempt of remembering Yugoslavia, and then destroying the monuments dedicated to the victims of the fascism and Ustaša regime. And this is, of course, a very important burden and big burden for the Croatia today when it comes to dealing with this part of our past. So this is Jadovno today. It's my ironical attempt to show you what you can expect when you come to the memorial place in Jadovno, although we have tried and nicely asked for taking this sign away. It was not welcome. So welcome to the Jadovno. Stayed there, and what you can also see on the edge of the Jadovno Memorial area is the monument that was erected in 2012, where you can see that there is a mourn about the death of a member of the Ustaša movement. So I was not translating to you the whole text. You can see it's a big one, but this is maybe interesting for analysis. The inscription reads as follows: Croatian national revolutionaries Ustaša rose up with this first uprising against Greater Serbian monarcho-fascism and occupation of 1918 till 1941. They ignited the spark of Croatian state independence, which was achieved in the 1991-1995 Homeland War after the collapse of Chetnik Yugoslav communist aggression. So although it's heavy for reading, and it's a devastating fact that there is still this cross and this plaque with exact these words dedicated to the member of Ustaša movement. Still, it's very interesting and very important for our understanding what the complexity of the heritage of the past in Croatia today. When it comes in our efforts to have a public discussion that is, of course, dignified one, with respect for historical for the today's context and historical truth. We are trying to raise awareness of the fact that in just 132 days, more than 10,000 people, for what we know for sure, have died in most terrible agony. But still, you can imagine the obstacles that we have. If, for example, you know that in September 2015, an Israeli TV crew visited the island of Pag to film the locations of the Ustasha concentration camp Slana during the World War II. It is interesting, this Israeli crew was traveling through the whole territory of the ex-Yugoslavia, and they were not having anywhere else the troubles with the shooting, finding people to cooperate with, and having a kind of oral history in their film. Unfortunately, the locals of Metaina were shouting that there was no camp, and they called police. But at the same time, they have attacked the members of the team, of the crew, and which then left the island, accompanied by the police for their own safety. So this is a level of denial of the Holocaust, genocide, and Samudaripen that is very specific, of course, for the island Pag, but you can find this example in many other places. In this kind of political context, we are trying, as the representatives of the peoples of victims, we are trying to develop the culture of remembrance. As is it obvious, I'm sure by now, our culture of remembrance is, and it has to be always a culture of resistance. So we have this obligation, as much as it's heavy one and heavy to fulfill, but we have this obligation to transform these places of denial, of oblivion, of course, of unimaginable human suffering due to the organized sadism and persecution in the Second World War, into the places of memory, the places of learning, and the places, of course, the places of hope. And what you can see here is our invitation to the commemoration to Yad Vashem on the right, and just an example of how you can transform a place of suffering into the place of hope, with the drawing of Jasenovac flower within a strong fist of resistance. This, of course, is a strategy that is very hard to complete. But from the 2008, we are rebuilding again the commemorative gatherings on the June 24, and 2011 we have, thanks to the support of the Croatian government, rebuilt the central monument, and you can see it on these pictures. Here is on the left the president of the coordination of Jewish municipalities, Ognjen Kroz, giving his speech on Yad Vashem, and to the right Milorad Pupovac, president of the Serbian National Council. And you can see that they are surrounded with the people. Around 300, even 400 people is coming to this commemoration at the end of June every year. Within our strategy that I was already describing you, we have tried to finish the memorial place, and what you can see on the left is the poem of the Ante Zemljar that I already mentioned as a first person to commemorate and risk his life because of it. And this is his song dedicated to the baseline and to the victims of Slama. On the right, you can see, if you ever visit this place, you can see the map and a brief introduction about what was Gospić Yad Vashem Pag, a concentration group of camps. Unfortunately, when we analyze our educational system, you cannot find this honorable name of Ante Zemljar in our history textbooks. And the picture is from the 2013 when we were at the Slana Bay putting the plaque. Once again, it was destroyed just a few days after. But what is devastating also as a fact, and it's of course a part of this destroying anti-fascist monuments, but also anti-fascist houses in the 90s, is that in 1993, the house and the studio of the author of the book about victims of the Slana and Metaina camps, already mentioned Ante Zemljar, were destroyed on Pag. And the state didn't rebuild it. Ante Zemljar died 2004, and his widow, also very brave person, by her own, rebuilt their house on Pag. Ante Zemljar is, why am I mentioning that you cannot find him in textbooks, is because he would be such a perfect example and inspiration for the agely proper group of the pupils, because at the same time you can learn about the extraordinary man that was not just a partisan fighter in the Second World War. He unfortunately ended up on the Goliotok political camp for the political enemies, and his life is very, very interesting and very important. It reflects Croatian past in its worst and in its best, but unfortunately we cannot learn about him. We, on the other hand, cannot learn about victims of Ustasha regime in the places of Jadovno that we are speaking now, as well as the other members of partisan movement that eventually won the war. In this photo, you can see historian Ivo Goldstein. He's a grandson of a bookstore owner from Karlovac, Ivo Goldstein as well, who was killed on Jadovno, and who was Slavko Goldstein's father. And here is a quote from Slavko Goldstein's book about getting, after more than 60 years, a letter from his dad, who was writing it in a camp a few days before he was killed. And Ivo Goldstein this year was one of the speakers on the Jadovno, on the commemoration, which is very important for us to have the voice of the representatives of the relatives of the victims. And for the end, there is a quote from our monument, which I hope you will all visit once. Jadovno was not a place of struggle. The only certain thing on Jadovno was death. Jadovno is the forerunner of the Jasenovac concentration camp. On the picture you can see, which I call the hug, you can see Rabbi Prelevic, rabbi of the Croatia, and Bishop Jovan from Slavonia in the embrace of consolation near the Šaranova Jama on Jadovno, after they had Kaddish and Orthodox ritual for the victims killed within the territory of the Gospić Jadovno Pag camp. So that would be all from my part for now, and I am of course at your disposal for any questions.
The third speakers for the discussion of today is Anna Mishkova. She is historian of the Museum of Romani Culture, specializing in the Holocaust of Roma and Sinti. Since 2018, she has been a member of the Czech Republic's delegation to the IRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. She is also the leading researcher of the grant from IRA to create an exposition concept for the future memorial in Leti u Pisku. Anna is currently with the team of experts preparing a new exhibition for the Leti Memorial, and the book focused on memories of survivors. So after the very interesting presentation of Aneta about the Jadovno Gospić Park camp, now we will move to the Czech Republic, where, as I told, as I said at the beginning, a camp for Roma was active during the Second World War. I have also to thank to Anna Miškova that will present the case of Leti, because in a way they inspired us in writing and our project about the Topovske šupe. So for us, it's very important to have you today with us. Please, the floor is yours.
I hope that you can all see it now. Yeah, just a second. So, thank you once again for inviting me. And my name is Anna Miškova, and I'm from Museum of Romani Culture. The story of the place called Leti near Písek, started quite long ago. Actually, the first thing that was there in a place near the village Leti was a forced labor camp and then a small collection camp. On the same place was in August 1942 established a so-called gypsy camp. This place was a concentration camp for Roma and Sinti from the Bohemia. The similar camp was established at Hodonín u Kunštátu for the Roma and Sinti from Moravia. In the camp was imprisoned approximately 1,300 prisoners, including women, men, children, seniors, pregnant women. And it was really a concentration camp, not a forced labor camp, mostly because it was meant for Roma and Sinti because of their race. All the prisoners who came to the camp had to go through a horrific experience, because when they first entered the camp, they were forced to clean themselves in front of everybody. They had to strip off all their clothes. They were shaved on all over their bodies, and all the property was taken away. Men received uniforms from former uniforms that were colored black, and women and children kept their clothes. For all the prisoners, it was important that they all had to work in the quarry, at the road works, and the road was quite hard. They had to work at least 10 hours a day. What the prisoners had to go through was really horrific, horrible situation, because not just because of the hard work, but also because the whole camp was firstly meant only for 300 prisoners. But during a really short time, during the August, there were more than 1,000 prisoners in the camp, and the property was not prepared for so many people. The prisoners were not allowed. There were no possibility for them to keep themselves clean, to wash their clothes, to have some proper hygiene. So it was no surprise that during such a short time, there was a big epidemic of diseases, mostly the typhoid epidemic, and this led to a quarantine of the whole camp at the end of the epidemic spread out at the end of the year 1942, and the whole camp was under quarantine from the beginning of the year 1943. The reason why the prisoners were kept there was because they were meant to be transported to the concentration and extermination camp Auschwitz to Birkenau. The first transport went off on during the December 1942, where approximately up to, I think, 80 prisoners were transported to the Auschwitz to Birkenau. The main transport went in May 1943, when more than 500 prisoners were transported directly to concentration camp Auschwitz to Birkenau. Because of the horrific conditions in the camp, the prisoners were suffering really badly, and 326 prisoners died, most of them children. Also, more than 30 children were actually born in the camp. The youngest child who died in the camp was only 4 days old. Most of the children who were born in the camp did not survive. At first, the prisoners were buried at the camp in the close city Mirovice, but later on, because of the typhoid epidemic, there were established some kind of provisional mass graves near the camp, and most of the prisoners are buried there. All the prisoners who were kept in the camp were on the disposal of the guards, and down on the presentation you can see the pictures who were drawn one of the survivors after the war, who tried to show what the prisoners went through, what were the punishments. And on the picture you can see one prisoner who had a big metal ball with chain on his hands, and the other one is kept up on the pole as a punishment. Some of the prisoners tried to escape. For only few of them it was successful, and maybe you have already heard about the story of the black partisan Josef Cernek, who actually escaped from Lety, and then he joined the other partisans and he fought for his country. The story of Lety as a so-called gypsy camp ends in 1943, when the camp was closed. All the prisoners were either transported to the concentration camp or left alone because they were considered as non-gypsies, non-Roma. And because of the typhoid epidemic, the camp was taken apart and then burned down. So there was almost nothing left on the place of the former camp. I say almost because even though everything was taken apart and burned down, we know from the pictures, from the aerial pictures, that what was left of the camp was the grounds, the basics, and you can see that there was something there. And what was it? Also, the city of Lety was supposed to take care of the mass graves or the cemetery near the camp, where most of the prisoners were buried. On this place in the 60s were risen a wooden cross. We are not sure who actually had made the cross, but it was it disappeared during next years. Also in the 70s, a small commemoration plaque was made on the Mirovice cemetery, where most of the children are buried. Another chapter of the place starts in the 70s, where on the place really close to the former camp was built a pig farm, as you have already heard. The pig farm was built beneath the place near the main road. But then during the 90s, the area of the pig farm was already actually and enlarge on the place where the former camp was. So currently, the whole area is on the place of the former camp. The situation of the Roma and Sinti after the war was not good enough for them to be acknowledged as the victims of the Holocaust, and they had no proper opportunity to actually commemorate their families, for the survivors to visit the place of their families and friends and relatives and on their graves, because there was no place to actually do the commemoration. And the placement of the pig farm on the place of the former camp, where so many Roma and Sinti suffered and died, was seen, and is still seen, as something unimaginable for those who actually been there and suffered, and for those whose families perished in Lety or were taken away to Auschwitz, to Birkenau, where they died. This little bit changed in 1995, when the memorial by Zdeněk Hula was built on the place of the mass graves. The memorial by Zdeněk Hula is still there, and in the 1995 was actually the first commemoration act that happened in Lety, and was attended also by our former president Václav Havel, as you can see on the picture. It was because after the Velvet Revolution, after the 1989, the topic of what happened in Lety, and not just Lety, but also in Hodonín and other places, to Roma and Sinti during the Second World War, became a topic that was a little bit more spread around the society than before the Velvet Revolution. And it was finally time to talk about it out loud, to talk about the victims, to talk about the families, and maybe that the pig farm on the place where so many Roma and Sinti suffered is not a good way to commemorate their suffering. So many protests risen against the pig farm. The protests were trying to show that all victims of Holocaust should be commemorated, and that having a pig farm on the place is not a dignified memory. And maybe that the memorial should be built there instead of the pig farm. But the way was really long. It took more than 20 years to actually for this plan to go out. And it's an honor for me to say that in 2017, the government of Czech Republic finally decided that the pig farm should be bought out and that the memorial should be built there. In 2018, it happened, and the area of the pig farm was bought out by the state and given to administer to the Museum of Romani Culture. And from then, we are supposed to take care of the place and to prepare the memorial for this place. In 2018, we decided that the memorial should be finally a dignified place for the families of the survivors, for the families of the victims, to come there, to lay down a piece of flower, to light a candle, to think about what they have lost, but also for all others to educate themselves about the atrocities that happened in Lety. And we wanted to make sure that the place is that the place suits the needs of the families of the survivors, and that as many people can say what they think as possible. So we decided to make an architectural competition, architectural landscape competition. And before that, we organized few roundtables around the Czech Republic, so we can listen as many voices as possible. And then in 2019, the architectural competition started. Before that, we had a working group with specialists from the Romanists, from with the historians, architects, curators, and also the families of the survivors to prepare the proper materials for the architects for the competition. In 2019, the whole competition started, and in the first round, 41 proposals from whole world entered the competition. From that, 7 finalists went to the second round, and the jury that included families of the survivors, also the architects, the landscape architects, one of the workers from the Ministry of Culture, and also us from Museum of Romani Culture, chose the winning proposal. And the whole competition was for the whole area, not just the former camp, but also for the mass graves and the pig farm, as we thought that it's needed. The story of Lety is needed to be told as a whole, not just about the atrocities that happened there during the Second World War, but also about the commemoration, about the so-called forgotten Holocaust. And on these pictures, you can see how the memorial will look like. On the right, I think that is also for you on the right, sorry. There is a whole area with the big circle on the place where the camp was. There will be a visitor center for the exhibition, for the education, and for the visitors to have some rest. And there is also a place of the mass graves, which will be left as they are, because the families of the survivors did not wish for the victims to be exhumated, so they are still buried there and they will remain in peace. And a wooden cross will be there because of the commemoration acts and because everyone needs to have a place for their prayer. We were thinking a lot about what will happen with the pig farm, with the buildings of the pig farm, because there are 13 buildings, they are huge, and we thought that the pig farm needs to be somehow visible. And the architects came with the idea that the pig farm will be torn down. Only 3 of the buildings will be left, not alone, but some of it will be shown, and the forest will go through the buildings. The memorial should be open in 2023. We hope that everything will work out. And now we are working closely with the architects on the project, and we are also working with the working group on the exhibition. There's also a project financed by IRA for the concept of the exhibition. So we are working on the memorial very intensely right now, and we hope that everything will go as smooth as possible, and most of the pig farm should be torn down next year, as we had to postpone it because of the pandemic and also because of the project. So I hope that the story of Lety is not yet closed, because there is still lots of the work in front of us. And I hope that the Lety Memorial will be place for commemoration, for education, for everyone to come and to learn about what happened there, because still, even now, the information about what happened in Lety, what happened in Hodonín, and what happened to Roma and Sinti in Czechoslovakia in protectorate is still largely unknown. And most of the people don't know that 90% of the Roma and Sinti from Bohemia and Moravia were murdered in the Second World War during the Holocaust. And this is something that needs to be well known. And the victims needs to be commemorated. And I'm really honored to be part of the team that is working on a place that will finally maybe give them a dignified place. Thank you very much.
Thank you another time, Anna, for being here with us and for sharing with us not only knowledge about the history but of the camp, but about your experience. I think that this is very, very important today to have an important feedback, also from you. Now we will move to Italy. We'll talk about the camp of Monigo, Treviso. In that city, I came from civilians from for Croats and Slovenians was active in 1942 and 1943. What is important to say is that in Italy, still today, the dealing with the fascist past is a very complicated issue. For example, considering the concentration camps and the crimes committed by the Italian forces in Yugoslavia, Albania, Greece, in Libya, Ethiopia, and so on, we have to say that it's quite difficult to talk about the issues in public and also, for example, in the school systems. For the reason, I think that Francesca Meneghetti, that will talk, who will talk about the Monigo camp and the organization, the Istresco organization from Treviso, they're doing a very important job in preserving and in recovering the memory of what happened in that concentration camp. Francesca Meneghetti, she has a PhD in history of European society from the University of Venice. She's a researcher of the Istresco, the Institute for History of the Resistance and Contemporary History from Treviso. She published different books as I Vagabondi, la società e lo Stato nella Repubblica di Venezia nel fine del Settecento, and Treviso, Genova, andata e ritorno, gli albori dell'emigrazione transoceanica. In 2012, she published the book Di là del muro, il campo di concentramento di Treviso. That is the more comprehensive work about this camp. And the book was republished last year in 2019. So Francesca, thank you for being here with us, and please, the floor is yours.
I will tell you about the history of Treviso barracks named Cadorin, still in operation, which in the past was a concentration camp. Treviso is 30 kilometers from Venice in northeastern Italy. Let's start with a recent event when Cadorin Barracks became a memorial site. Two commemorative plaques were uncovered, one in Italian, the other with translation into 3 languages: English, Slovenian, Croatian. This is the second plaque. Perhaps you can read the text. These people in the photo are the commander of the military barracks, the major, the Slovenian ambassador, the Croatian consul, and bishop. On the left, there was Istresco president. I'll tell you something about Istresco later. The Treviso concentration camp, from now on we will call it the TCC, is also known as Monigo concentration camp. But Monigo is just a suburban parish, as you can see on this slide. The barracks, designed for soldiers, included 6 buildings. When it was converted into a CC, 5 were for the prisoners, the other 1 for guard soldiers. In addition, you can see below the command building, and above the building reserved for services. This is only original photo that we have. It was taken by a Slovenian photographer, or so it seems. The barracks was chosen for the setting up of a CC for Slovenian and Croat civilians. They came from lands occupied by the Italian army in Yugoslavia. This happened after the invasion of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia in April 1941. The annexation of Slovenia ensued, and the redrawing of borders. So, resistance was born in Slovenia. Italy began a hard repression, especially with a circular number 3C, designed by General Roatta. In fact, the Italian army was in charge of managing the repression. So, people were rounding up here in Ljubljana. Then we have arrests, deportations, villages destroyed, shootings and firing squads. Several CCs were created in Italy and in occupied Yugoslavia. Thousands of civilians were locked up as prisoners, 30,000 from Slovenia alone. The system created by the fascist regime until September 1943 provided for two parallel actions, one for suspect people as Jews managed by Interior Ministry, the other by Italian army. Let's get back to the TCC. We can see here the essential data about it. When, who, how many deaths, why the deaths. To have the right distinctions, is it important to emphasize that TCC, like other fascist CC, but unlike RAB camp, was not an extermination camp, but malnutrition and physical discomfort were planned. A particularly sad aspect of this camp was the high rate of child mortality due to malnutrition, as proven by the autopsy report. Now, we have a new development in the TCC, the arrival of prisoners of war from March 1943. So soldiers and civilians were in the same place of imprisonment, but only the soldiers worked outside the barracks. They were New Zealand and South African soldiers captured in Tobruk, Africa, by Axis troops. This slide shows what happened in the barracks after the armistice or capitulation. First of all, the escape of prisoners with a possible capture by Nazis. Then the cover of the barracks by the German troops. And when the war was over, a displaced persons camp, DP camp, was set up. So we have a stratified history of this place, which affects the memory. Memory, or not memory, requires knowledge. We remember or forget what we know. So in Treviso, how many people knew these facts covered by military secrecy? For sure, the authorities and people nearby who created an ad network, but many ignored it. In post-war anti-fascist Italy, there was a desire to forget what the fascist regime had created, such as the CC. The historian Capogreco used this expression, self-absorbing collective conscience. So there were 20 years of historical narrative silence about this. Then, the demands of the international politics may have favored the systematic removal of memory. First of all, the need to establish good relationship with Tito after his detachment from the USSR. It pushed toward the parallel coverage of Italian crimes and foibe. It would like too long to examine this aspect, and this is not our intention to go further on this here. There were other reasons for forgetting of a local nature. For example, confusion between the CC and the P camp. Then the preponderant memory of bombarding of Treviso, 1,600 dead. Capogreco, in his important book about the fascist camp, Campi del Duce, tells of an event that happened in 1965. A Slovenian delegation arrived in Treviso to pay tribute to the dead of the CC, but nobody knew where the dead were buried. Nobody remembered. This shameful episode prompted some more sensitive people to do research. First of all, Ivo Dalla Costa, a communist intellectual, who also started an anti-fascist battle on this subject. In 1975, 20 years after the end of the war, Cino Boccazzi, writer and doctor, brought out some articles in a Venetian weekly publication. He had served in a hospital where several prisoners were hospitalized. His description of the death of the child named Milan is very touching. In 1980 was an exhibition of a Vladimir Lamut drawing. The major, Antonio Mazzaroli, received the Ljubljana major with the Slovenian delegation, a first gesture of reconciliation. The Istresco, my historical institute, founded in 1992 in Treviso, began and continued the historical narrative of the TCC. Here you can see the list of the publication about this subject. Our institute also organized public events, as well educational activities with high school students. See, for example, this video, winner of a competition launched by Istresco. We will now see some short sequences. In the last one, The girl who brings flowers as a tribute to the dead says, memory requires planning. Just a moment.
Disperazione, commiserazione e malinconia. Sento nomi che rimbombano nella mia testa come pesanti echi, pesanti, ma vividi. Segnano la terra, creando cicatrici profonde, ma invisibili. I ricordi hanno il loro stesso peso, marcano la nostra coscienza, incidendo su di essa ogni piccolo particolare. La memoria, c'è molto da fare perché sembra noi stessi, richiede progettualità in nome di coloro che hanno visto insieme i loro sforzi, condensare i loro ricordi in un luogo comune, che sia forse rintracciati di solo dentro di me. Una donna stringe tra le braccia un pesante mazzo di metallo rosso e vorrei piedi di una lacrima. Un uomo che non questo fiore, sentendo capace forse di sopportare il peso del suo corpo.
Another example, a commemorative plaque, a bas-relief, created by a student of the Artistic High School. It was placed in the courtyard of the old hospital, where the civilian prisoners were brought from TCC. A large audience attended the ceremony organized by Estresco as well. There were Italian and diplomatic authorities. In many speeches, the importance of tolerance, human dignity, and international cooperation was emphasized. February 2017. The Treviso City Council decided to create a memorial plaque at Catherine Barracks by prior arrangement with the military authority. Let's go back to the starting point. Now, Catherine Barracks is a place of memory after 77 years. In future days of remembrance, it will be a destination of a civil pilgrimage and the occasion for reflections on justice and peace. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Francesca, for your presentation. That was also very important for me personally because I grew up in Treviso. So, in a way, it's important for me not only as a historian to know more about the camp, but also as a person who lived in that beautiful city. Now is the turn of Jean-Philippe Lantes. He will talk about the Saint-Sulpice camp in southern France. This camp is not so known, but I think that it's important because, as I said at the beginning, through the camp passed not only Jews, but also many anti-fascists. And today, probably talking about anti-fascism and revisionism is also something that we should do often. Jean-Philippe Lantes, he is member of the ASER, the Friends of the Fighters in Republican Spain, and the National Federation of Deported and Imprisoned Resistance Fighters and Patriots. He is active in preserving the memory of the former concentration camp in Saint-Sulpice. In 2015, together with the Department Committee of Resistance and Deportation Associations, he managed to put a plaque on the wall of the station of Saint-Sulpice in memory of the people victims of the deportation. In 2017, he initiated a similar project in memory of Boris Taslitsky, painter, deported from Saint-Sulpice to Buchenwald in July 1944. A plaque in the promenade near to the town hall were dedicated to him. So please, Jean-Philippe, the floor is yours.
Effective, you hear me? Hello? You hear me? Effective in December 1941, is 1,463 internists. You heard me? Yes, go on. Yes, go on, I go on. Many communists and trade unionists had the responsibility in their organization. They were elected or delegated in their town, their department, or factories. After Soviet-German Pact, they are interned under the Decree Daladier of September 26, 1939, or after their demobilization of the army, or for acts of resistance against Pétain, or the occupation troops from the summer 1914. For example, demonstration of July 14 of November 11 for alimentation or sabotage and so on. The repression will increase with the law of September 3, 1914, before the law on the statute of Jews of October 3, 1914. We can quote Roger Garaudy, philosopher and future deputy, Gaston Viens, future deputy of Orly, many intellectuals and artists, Paul Chermolache, future deputy of Marseille, intellectual and artist, Jean Cassou, Boris Tadiski, Célestin Freinet, Jules Anquetil, Jacques Villemets, and so on. Another reason for incarceration is to have been member of international brigade. On 1,500 names studied, I could find 91 brigadists. For example, we can quote Julien Héroldi, future deputy of Lyon. After the invasion of USSR in 1941, 207 people of Russian origin are screened. 181 will be realized. The August 26, 1942, 226 foreign Jews of department are rounded up in the camp during the big rounding up in France at this time. These Jews of Poland, Germany, Austria, or Czechoslovakia had taken refuge in town. This department was renowned for its textile industry. Many will be hidden and saved. Significant fact of the department of town, we have a Jewish maquis in the mountains of Lacan. Another Jews were interned in the camp, but more for their action in resistance than for the fact who are Jews. For example, Roger Rosenwald, who evaded in March 15, 1944, and joined the FFI, French Interior Forces. He did in the fight of Moulins, the September 5, 1944. We can find also the name of brothers René Cassin or Francis Crémieux. After the end of 1943 and in 1944, in addition to the communists, was a resistance fighter of all movements and organizations which are interned: Gaullist, Secret Army, Resistance United Movement. For example, two commissioners, Louis Niquet and Antoine Pitiot. 263 people passed through the barracks 21, which was disciplinary, with deprivation and torture. In the beginning, the French dangerous, then the unwanted foreigners. Spanish Republican, of course, Yugoslav, German, or Italians, and so on, often former of international brigades, and finally resistance fighter or anti-Nazi fighter of all nationality. Gaullist, member of SOE, FTP, Frank sniper and partisan communist, FTP MOE, like the group of Manouchian, Spanish guerrilla or Republicans, American or Canadian pilots, and so on. After the war, the Nazi collaborators were imprisoned in the camp until 1946. The camp is really platform for deportation, transfer, and transport. Our shell-week system we practice in the concentration camp of Saint-Sulpice-la-Pointe by the collaborationist government of Pétain and Laval. You like the plane. With the Nazi occupation, isolation, solitary confinement, sent to forced labor, hard work, expatriation, handover to the German authorities, transit to the DIF. Transport. From February to December 1941, 200 dangerous communist leaders are transferred in the camp of Algeria, Jeffa, Bossuet, and so on. We can find André Moine. Spanish Republicans are already interned, and the Jew of Algeria will follow. March 3, 1943, departure of 44 internees for third seat on the Atlantic. March 14, 1943, departure of 192 internees for third seats, but 86 escape. March 15, departure of 43 internees for third seats. March 23, 1943, departure of 83 internees towards Bayonne, La Rochelle, and Royan, but 35 escapes. Transfer. February 1941. Arrival of 293 men of camp of Oraison and 425 men of camp of Chibron. In 1942, departure of 234 internees for the camp of Forbau. Many transfer towards the camp now of Noé, Le Vernet d'Ariège, Orgus. We can find Francesco Fausto Nitti, nephew of Francisco Nitti. He will be deported by the ghost train. Deportation. August 26, 1942. Arrivals of 226 foreign Jews of Stan Department. September 2, departure of 223 of Vez toward Dancy. July 30, 1944, 623 internees are handed over to the German authorities for an unknown destination, in fact, the concentration camp of Buchenwald. Action for Memory, new fight for memory of Barracks 21. For more than 40 years, the municipality of Saint-Sulpice-la-Pointe, the Association of Resistance and Deportation, the Association of Veterans, and the state authority held a commemoration ceremony at the stele of the camp in memory of the internees and foreign Jews of the department. We can read the text of first flight who are deposited. Here were interned from October 16, 1940 to August 23, 1944, Patreons, men, women, children, whose only thought was to have an attitude, a conviction, or an anti-Nazi or anti-fascist action which lead to other place of concentration and to leave some of them. A second place near the first for 200 dangerous communists and trade unionists who were deported in the camp in North Africa. The foreign Jews rounded by the Vichy police in August 1942 and were transported to Danzig camp a few days later on 2 September 1942. On 9 and 11 September, there's 243 Jews were deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau by convoys 30 and 31. Almost all of them were gassed on arrival. No children will survive. Only 11 adults will return. This deportation, the starting point of one of the accomplices of the Shoah carried out by French authority collaborationists of Nazi, lasted only a few days in the life of the camp. The other internet and political internet will demonstrate and protest in front of what they saw before their eyes. For them, the occupation of France by the Germans and the collaboration of Pétain and Laval did not realize the prisoner in July 1940. On the contrary, the repressive laws of Vichy will continue the hunt for French undesirable as foreigner, anti-fascist, refugee or former international brigade or Spanish Republican. It occurred to me then that it was important not to dissociate for a camp like that of Saint-Sulpice the different victim of Nazi barbarians, even if dying for what one is not the same as dying for what one thinks. In 2014, I proposed on behalf of ACER to the Department Committee of Resistance and Deportation Association, including the National Federation, to place a plaque on the wall of the Saint-Sulpice train station from where undesirable French left to the camps in North Africa, over internet to the agency told, the young people to the STO, the German, Polish or Hungarian Jews to Drancy, then the extermination, and 623 internet to Buchenwald, from where only 58% will return. This remembrance action will be completed in May 2015. In 2015, with the active support of associations such as the Holocaust Memorial. Among the 623 deported to Buchenwald by transport, 1252 on 31 July 1944, at the final departure from Toulouse, one could only pay tribute to Boris Tazitsky, painter, communist, Jew. In 2017, a walk will be inaugurated in his name, who patiently, it's a Buchenwald camp, will do 101 drawings, witness of the concentration universe. He had painted 7 very ecumenical frescoes inside the camp of Saint-Sulpice, which earned him the name of Master of Saint-Sulpice by Aragon. Today, I call some elected officials of the department to have a place of remembrance in Castres and Gaillac to remember all those who were interned the Barracks 21, anti-fascist activists, former international brigades, resistance fighters of all obedience and all origins, military and patriots. We can quote Daniel Renaud, journalist of l'Humanité, and Fred of Jean Jaurès, present in the assassination of Jean Jaurès. The deputy the deputies of Reichstag: Franz Dahlen, Siegfried Radel, Heinrich Schroe, Rudolf Stender, and also Rudolf Leonard. Luigi Longo, Edmond Bergamini, Lyubov Ilyich, Vladimir Rybar, Uradin Boris, Bekovich Vlachko, Georgievich Svetislav, the Austrian Emanuel Edel, and so on and so on. Many have escaped and have returned to the battle. We want to talk you also this camp is, for conclusion, this camp has experienced many escape during work on the farm or in the forest. 22 prisoners escape through a tunnel. But in the barracks 21, there is big escape. This escape from Castres with 36 escapes, with the support of the communist resistance and also the support of Patline, Pipeline escape network led by the Belgian Albert Geris, alias Pat O'Leary. In September 1633. But also after in Gaillac, where the barracks 21 transferred in Gaillac after this escape. In Gaillac in July 1944, with the support of the secret army and the FTP of the city of Carmaux, the city of Jean Jaurès. 36 escapes. For conclusion, if je la retrouve, these fights are long before they are successful, but perhaps it is better because it is guarantees the continuity of the memory action. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Philippe, for your presentation, very interesting presentation, and also for remembering us how is important today to remember the anti-fascists and the anti-fascist struggle for liberation of Europe. I will now present I will give you some basic information about the Topovske Šupe camp. Only basic information because on Sunday we will have a visit to the location. So I will talk about the history of the camp on Sunday. But now I think it's better to give you some basic information about the history of the camp, and also to present our project activities and of course our results. Okay. Now I want to show to share my screen. So basically, the Topovske Šupe camp was a camp in the city of Belgrade. It was established in August 41, and it was active until December 41. It was a camp for Jews and Roma, but only for male Jews and male Roma. From the region of Banat and from Belgrade. They were interned and killed in killing sites around Belgrade in September, October, and November 41. We don't know, we don't have, unfortunately, many information about the history of the camp. What we know, we can estimate that about 5,000 Jews passed through the camp, and also about 1,500 Roma, and they were all killed in this field, in this killing sites. As you can see, the Topovske šupe camp was located in a very high populated area of the city. After the Topovske šupe camp, another camp was established for Jews, but this time for Jewish women and children. It was the camp of Sajmište that was also located, let's say, in the heart of the city, or in front of the old city of Belgrade. We don't have any information, but we can see, for example, from these photos taken in 1944 during the bombing of Belgrade, that the location was where exactly was the camp. I think that it's very important to consider not only what happened inside of the camp, but also what was going on all around the camp. And in this case, in the case of Topovske šupe, we can say that the life was more or less going on normally around the camp. So you can see, for example, on the left, the stadium, and every week, every Sunday, a person from Belgrade went to the stadium and watched the football games. But also, as you can see, the camp was situated in the city. This is another picture. This is a picture from the pre-war period. On the right side, you can see the fence of the camp. This means that the inhabitants of Belgrade were they knew what was happening inside the camp and what was happening with the Jews and the Roma. This is another picture. It's from 1949. It means from the post-war period, and also here you can see the location. I think it's very important because if we consider the camp from this perspective, we can also think about the position of the bystanders. This is one of the reasons why we decided to write a project and have a project about the Topovske šupe camp. We decided to produce knowledge, of course, but also to raise awareness about the camp. What is important to stress is that if you, for example, ask to the people that who live around the camp, the majority of them, they don't know that the camp was active in that buildings. The second reason for why we decided to start the project and why we decided to call the project Mapiranje Holokausta, preservation of the camp, of the Topovske šupe camp, is that these buildings are still existing, but unfortunately they are in a private property, and probably, we don't know, but there is the risk that next year or maybe in 2 years the buildings will be destroyed, and instead of them the biggest shopping mall of the Balkans would be built. So we decided to raise awareness and to let's say fight against this risk, against the destroying of the building and the building of a shopping mall. Of course, the project, I will show now the website, the Serbian version. We're still working on the English version. Also, unfortunately, the Serbian version is still not finished, but we will finish I think in 2 weeks. First of all, about the project, of course, why we wrote the project and the reasons behind the project. Then something about the history of the project, and about the current state of the location, and about the future plans. We thought that it would be very important to share and to publish the documents we have about the camp and from the camp. First of all, the letters from the inmates. We found in the Jewish Historical Museum in Belgrade some letters, and we decided to publish here. Of course, the transcription in PDF format will be available, as well as the translation in English. Beside the letters, we decided to publish the testimonies. These are mainly testimonies from Roma women that survived, and that after the end of the Second World War talked about the destiny of their husbands, the male members of their families. So thanks to these testimonies, today we know we have a knowledge about the Topovske šupe camp, but also about the genocide of the Roma in Belgrade. The third section is dedicated to the documents produced, for example, by the German authorities and by the local Serbian collaborationist authorities concerning the Jews in the camp, but also concerning the forced labor, because during that time and also before the camp was established, the Jews were forced to clean, for example, the city of Belgrade from the ruins of the bombing of April 41. Then we have some photos. We will upload the photos. We have only some pictures, not of the camp. I have to say that we had many difficulties in finding records in the archives. We tried to find records in local archives in Serbia and also, of course, in Germany, but we had many problems, and unfortunately, we didn't find many documents. Then we have a map, because we think that it's important also today to know where the camp is located and how to reach the camp, but also what was in function all around the camp. So, for example, you will have we have the location of the camp, and of course some information, but then we have also information about other sites close to the camp, not connected to the history of the camp and to the Holocaust, but connected more to the everyday life. For example, the stadium I mentioned of the football club, and for example, this was also houses for officers and so on. So in this way, we want to show how the camp was in a way normalized, and the Jews inside the camp, they were they were not interned in a camp outside of the city, but they were interned in a camp inside of the city, in the heart of the city. Another section is dedicated to the victims. We have now we're producing a list of the victims, because unfortunately we still don't know how many Jews we have. We can only estimate the victims, the number of the victims. But now we are trying to produce a list of victims. Until now we have about 2,000 names. We think that it's very important not only to talk about the victims in general, but also to have the names of the victims. And we are trying to produce this list by using different sources like the Yad Vashem Shoah database, the documents we found in the local archives, and especially in the archives of Yugoslavia and in the Jewish Historical Museum. Then we have another section dedicated to the activities, because during the project we had different activities. We organized different visits. This is one of them of last year, and now you can see here. You can see, for example, the condition of one of the buildings where the Jews and the Roma were interned. Unfortunately, these buildings, as you can see, are in a very, very bad condition. This is a picture from the inside of this building. And this is another one. The only sign that exists and that testimonies about the existence of the camp is a plaque. We cannot see now. Is a plaque put by the Jewish community on a wall of one of these buildings that commemorate the victims of the camp, mentioning both the Jewish and the Roma victims. We will upload also the video of these visits, and we will upload, of course, the video of our discussion today, of the discussion of yesterday, and of the visit that will be held on Sunday. We have also some interviews, because we also thought it would be very important to have some interviews with, first of all, with the representatives of the Jewish community. In this case, the president of the Federation of the Jewish Communities of Serbia, Robert Sabadoš. Then with Lucia Reiner, that her father and her grandfather, they were victims actually of the Topovske šupe camp. Milan Koljanin, he is a historian, and he's one of the most important historians who deals with the Holocaust and relative and topics connected to the Holocaust in Serbia and in former Yugoslavia. And then in Asia, Drača Munteanu, she's from the Ministry of Culture of the Republic of Serbia, and she was at the head of a working group that wrote the law on the memorial of Staro Sajmište. The law was approved by the Serbian parliament some months ago, and this is a very important law, and we will talk about this law on Sunday. This is a very important law because finally they decided to protect the former location of Sajmište and probably also the location of the Topovske šupe camp. So this is the project presentation. Of course, when we talk about the project and the activities and the result, we have to mention the organizations that supported our project, and they are the IRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, the Federation of the Jewish Communities of Serbia, the Claims Conference on Jewish Materials, Claims Against Germany, and the Embassy of the Federal Republic of Germany from Belgrade. So this is a very short presentation about the Topovske šupe camp and about our project. On Sunday, we will talk about the history of the camp, and we will visit the locations and the building. We will enter into the buildings, and we will have also a live stream from the location. Probably the president of the Jewish communities will join us, as well as a representative from the Ministry of Culture. So we will have also the possibility to talk about the law on the memorial of Staro Sajmište.
Okay, thank you to all for your presentations, and thank you for being here. We recorded, of course, the webinar, and so it will be available on our Facebook and YouTube channels. I think that, as I said at the beginning, it was an attempt to not only to share knowledge, but also to share our experiences. And I think that only if we build some networks where we can share these experiences, we can do something really on, let's say, European level. Sometimes we feel alone in our, let's say, struggles for preserving these places, but in this way we will be together. So I think that we could, I hope actually that we will continue in this in our activities. And I think that we can start a collaboration together, maybe also involving other cases from other different countries. Thanks to all, and thanks for another time to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, to the Claims Conference,
the Federation of the Jewish Communities of Serbia, the Embassy of the Federal Republic of Germany in Belgrade, and the Ministry of Culture of the Republic of Serbia, who made possible this discussion. See you on Sunday from the location Topovske šupe. We will have this guided visit to the location. Of course, you can follow us as today on our Facebook and on our YouTube channels. So see you on Sunday, and thank you. Thank you.